Alrighty lads, we are back with some lore. This time, the Vampire Civil War. Who could have struck first? So, Legacy of Kain is an awesome, fascinating series. Much of it is left to your interpretation, and that's something that I've always been into. And this is one of the reasons why I'm a little cautious when they say they're releasing an official encyclopedia, because then they may say things as concrete and grounded, which gets rid of a lot of the magical properties of Legacy of Kain, was that it was about interpretation. You could replay the game 3 or 4 times and you'll come out with 3 or 4 different views on how the thing may have occurred. So let's begin with the Vampire Civil War. Who struck first? Who could have done it? Well, when Kain casted Raziel down the abyss and roughly like 500 to 1,000 years had passed, upon reawakening, we the players arrived to a much emptier world where the vampires have devolved into monsters that fight each other for the last drops of blood that exist in this dying world. Here we see that Raziel's clan is wiped out completely. Never it is shown, but in the old video game, that's off, unfortunately, Nosgoth, we do get insight as to how all of the clans kind of descended onto the Razielums. You see in the video game that it was a multiplayer only video game called Nosgoth. That's literally just what it's called. It's just Nosgoth, for those of you who don't know. It was a team-based game, and there would be hints of lore spread throughout the loading screens, spread throughout the equipment screens when you're loading out your stuff. There's little tidbits of lore scattered all around. I was a fucking no-lifer, dude. I was reading everything. And of course, there is some really cool lore tidbits in there. And since this is an officially published game, I treat its lore as official. Now, there were blog posts, and there were certain things in the game that, of course, coincide with it. Like one class is called the Sentinel. And the Sentinel class is the Razielums, flying vampires that would descend onto the human team and just rip their asses apart. This being said, there was really no background into the Sentinel class, except that somehow they were Razielums during the time when humanity was almost there to beating the vampire empire during its decay. So that raises questions, and it turns out the development team did do a blog post about the lore behind the Razielums. This ties into my other Raziel lore videos I've done, where this really does boil down to these blog posts that are tied to this video game. Of course, some people do not like that because it's lore outside the video game. But on one hand, the video game's published, so I treat it as concrete lore. If you don't agree with me, dislike the video and move on with your life. Sorry. But there are some really fascinating things in here. So the first thing is that the moment that the Razielums were leaderless, much of the clans decided on how they should wage this fight. Because you see, a clan that was originally considered one of the best and most prestigious of clans, being Kain's first clan, more or less, they were very defenseless. And we find out that it wasn't just one clan who started the fighting. No, all the clans descended in a united effort and a last act of cooperation. They descended on the Razielums and just wiped them out. The Razielums, of course, hid their little neophytes who were mutating into a deep, deep underground cove that hopefully the other clans would never find, which is how their clan survived. But what happened after that? How did the Vampire Civil War even occur? Like, how did these clans, who just went from being cooperative, being buddy-buddy, smiting these Razielums down, how did they go from working together to immediately hostile? To where every single clan became their own individual nation, to where every single clan almost fell because the humans were more unified than they were and almost wiped them out. How did this all occur? Well, let's talk about when the Razielums fell and what happened immediately afterwards. So the moment that the Razielums were fallen, they were wiped out, immediately there was dissent amongst the ranks. Duma, Terrell, Zephon, Melchiah, they all bickered, and Rahab, they all bickered and argued about who gets the spoils, who gets the territory. Duma, of course, argued that the one who contributed the most to the fighting should get most of the reward. He had the most troops, he devoted the most effort. Terrell kind of more argued that those who are the strongest should get it. Terrell is, after all, the biggest dude in the room. And then there are others like, well, Melchiah himself. He said, those who need the resources the most should be getting it. That's kind of interesting phraseology, but yeah. And each of them had their own philosophical take on the matter, and each of them didn't reach a conclusion. They just started to bicker and brawl, and this is where we see the cracks in the throne, the destroying of the realm. From here on out, since none of them could agree, they all went their separate ways, and from here it's all left to speculation. But one thing is certain. One thing is very certain. When it came to attacking the Razielums, the very first clan leader to jump at this opportunity was none other than Zephon. Zephonim is a clan that's known for having spies and manipulators among its ranks. And this is something I find most fascinating. Because before the Razielums were wiped out, when Raziel himself was thrown in by Cain into the abyss, when the clan said, okay, what should we do about the Razielum? Immediately Zephon said we should wipe them out. We should attack them, like, right now. And now that they're obliterated, who else is there that's this warmongering? Duma thinks that everything should be united. Duma seemed to be of the mind that we could just absorb the Razielums into our ranks and divide out their resources, more or less, based on the size of the clans. And as I said in my previous video with Duma, he seems more of a uniter, not an aggressor. He seems more willing to cooperate with people. And when we see the Vampire Civil War leading up to its end, we see that Duma is the first one to break ranks and ask the other clan leaders, guys, can we put aside our grievances and fight the humans together? Because they are wiping us out. This is something that I could say Duma is definitely not the aggressor. He just doesn't come off to me. You could disagree, of course, but it just doesn't seem right that he would be the aggressor. Especially when we have this conflict at the very beginning of it, where Zephon immediately says, alright, Raziel's down. Quick, kill his clan. Just kill every single man, woman, child that's associated with Raziel. Just wipe them out. And then meanwhile, you have everyone else sitting there going, no, we should do this, we should do that. We should definitely attack them, but I don't know about wiping them out. And then there's also a few others that we could look at. There is Terrell and Duma. Terrell and Duma have always had this wager amongst each other on who's the better warrior. Now, while it is for certain that Duma would be more of a unifier and more of a cooperative sort of guy, after all, he kind of wants the throne for himself, Terrell strikes me more as a guy who just wants to be the greatest dude in the room. He wants to show that not only is he the greatest, but everyone should bow down to him in submission. Due to this mentality, I wouldn't be surprised if he himself was exerting his own influence into the Vampire Civil War, what could have potentially caused it, by him demanding other clans pay him tribute for his protection. The main issue Terrell has is that, he even knows it, his clan is very limited in numbers, and they're very spread thin. It's not due to the fact that they have rotting decay like the Melchiah. No, not at all. It's just due to the fact that the Terrellum are very picky about who they choose. They choose great people, great warriors, strong individuals. So, Terrell, while he may demand other clans to give him an intimidating tribute, in the end, I couldn't see him being that much of an aggressor. I could see him more as a stalwart type, where Duma would engage him and he would just repel you. So what about Rahab? Well, Rahab always seemed more experimentalist. He seemed more willing to just explore the world, explore his own anatomy. And as we saw in Soul Reaver 1, that's pretty much all he did, was find a new weakness and a new strength in his own body. He found an amazing ability to adapt to the water, and he found an amazing weakness to sunlight. Even the dimmed sun that they have from all the smoke and fog that's blocking the sun could still devastate his body. This is something, again, I couldn't see him being the aggressor, especially when we find out he cleared out a human city, more or less, during their whole decay and revolution. So again, Rahab is kind of off the list, as well as Terrell and Duma. Now, Melchiah, I could definitely see Melchiah being an aggressor. Now, the problem is that Melchiah knows he's weak. And Melchiah, in most of the blog posts, it seems is that the Melchahim were very numerous, and they relied upon their new magics and sorcery. This makes a lot of sense. Why else would you do this? Why else would you mass amount a huge amount of men in your army if you weren't doing it for the intent of waging war? Why else would you start practicing vile magics that involve summoning servants if you're not going to put them to use? This is something that I find most interesting, is Melchiah's philosophy of those who need should get the most. And this is where, after the Raziel's fall, we can see that everyone sort of parts ways after a brief session of anger and dueling. But it would be very interesting to see, what would Melchiah do? He's sitting here now. His other brothers are getting stronger. They're getting more emboldened. Cain is nowhere to be found. The Raziel's are wiped out. Now is the time to strike. Now is the time to unleash the undead hordes that he has been mastering his necromantic powers with. Now is the time to unleash the many, many, many foot soldiers of fledgling vampires he just created onto the other clans and defeat them. But then this all loops back to Zephon. Zephon has always been a weird, enigmatic figure. Something that Raziel himself even says that none of the other brothers could really figure out his mindset. On some hand, he comes off as a master manipulator, and on other times, he comes off as just a scheming dude who just likes to scheme for no other reason. There's always an endgame goal with him. After all, look at where he lives. He lives inside the greatest weapon humanity's ever designed. That's where he chooses to live. And it's in this choice that we can see that he's either living there as a defense, or he's living there because ultimately he's hoping to turn the greatest bastion, the greatest weapon that humanity has, and turn it to his own power. Which sort of fits the whole theme of this. Who in Soul Reaver 1 is still playing this game that, oh, there's a civil war still going? Who in this setting is still acting and taking strategic objectives, treating it as if they're still in war? Zephon is the only one who's doing that. Duma, he's pinned like a pincushion to his own little tiny throne. He's an inactive player. He's unable to do anything. And in the nosgoth video game, we see that he is the one who breaks the mold. He comes to everyone else for support, fighting the humans. When Eskandor, the Razielum, who rises from the grave to more or less introduce the Razielums back to the Duma and to the Cain's Empire, Duma is the first one to accept them. Even his own subordinates were willing to kill the Razielums, but not him. He was willing to help them, and he was willing to make all the clans provide blood supply to the Razielums, and hopefully integrate them back into society. But this is why I'm saying Duma is not really the one. Duma's more of a cooperator than anything else. He's more willing to use a tool rather than throw it in the garbage. Whereas Zephon's very full of himself. He considers himself greater than a lot of the people around him. He considers his knowledge and the way his mind works to be, well, narcissistically enough, a god complex. And this is something that I find very fascinating in Soul Reaver 1. It's like, why is he living inside a giant weapon? This is like making your home inside a nuke. Why would you do that? But then you start to think and you go, wait a minute. If he's living inside this thing, is he trying to alter the engineering of it and turn it into a weapon? Because it seems like the way the pipes are broken, that he's trying to figure out how to channel it, the sound of the blast, in a certain way that doesn't attack him. In case you may have noticed when you're going around Soul Reaver 1, a lot of the pipes going up are turned off. So every pipe that goes up to him is off, but all the other pipes that go down are totally working. They're totally fine. So maybe that's the point. Maybe Zephon is still in this aggressor stage. And that is why I think he is the first one. He probably did it. He probably told all of his agents and probably told all of the Zephanim, hey, let's go attack these guys right now while they're arguing about the Razielum territory. He is the one who probably instigated this war, and he is the one who should probably be condemned for weakening the Empire to allow humanity a chance to rise above them. This has been Freezer 700. I am out. I hope you guys enjoyed. Tell me about your interpretation of the situation. Who do you think struck first? Do you think it could have been, I don't know, Rahab of all people? Do you think it could have been Terrell? Personally, I always agree that Zephon is the most militant of all of them. But who knows, the encyclopedia could come out and I could be wrong. So, see you guys next time.